The experience of babies and young children in their early years has a powerful effect on their future lives. Of course, things which happen later on are important too, but young children are especially vulnerable to bad environments and open to the positive effects of good ones. Most parents want a happy, stimulating environment for their children and want to make an informed choice about their young child's care and education. Families differ in the amount of time their child attends a centre, but choosing quality is important, most particularly when children are in longer day centres. Sometimes such choices are simply not available, and in these days of deregulation and cost-cutting, even government-funded services cannot always be assumed to be of good quality. In this film, we want to look at some positive features for child development in early childhood centres and to suggest some things that parents can look for to provide their child with the best possible early childhood centre situation. Early Childhood Educare is a collective name for programs for young children, which incorporate both care and education. We want to use that label in this film because it's especially suitable for our integrated services in New Zealand, and because it removes a lot of unhelpful distinctions, such as the old one between childcare and preschool education. It is also valuable because it suggests that for young children, it's impossible to separate care and education. A caring and nurturing environment is usually the best environment in which a small child can learn, because it's also both stimulating and responsive. Many early childhood educators agree about the nature of good quality early childhood educare. We have listed 11 ingredients of quality. Adult-child interactions, adult-child ratios, trained staff, stability of staff, group size, planned programs or curriculum, peer stability and harmony, sensitivity to family and culture, biculturalism, safe and healthy physical environment, cost linked to quality. By far the most important aspect of good quality is the nature of the interactions and the relationships between adults and children. Vygotsky's work suggests that children's thinking emerges out of social interactions with sensitive social partners. It's a fallacy to think that learning and education can only occur when an adult has an authoritarian formal role and teaches academic content. Most psychologists today agree that children's intellectual achievements happen in the context of their talk and social interactions with others. Adult-child interactions should combine warmth, affection, nurturance and sensitivity, with firm demands backed up by reasoning. Adults need to know the child and family well to provide such interactions. Most of the other elements of quality also influence adult-child interactions in a centre.
To me, there's sort of an intuitive gut feeling, which probably is the strongest thing, and it's to do with emotional relationships. And I suppose if I'm in that role as a parent, which I've been a number of times, I'm looking for an emotional relationship, responsive relationships, physical touching, sort of almost what you might call love in children's eyes and love in staff eyes for each other, and that's to me is the fundamental thing, because unless that emotional relationship is there, I don't think any of the other things in terms of empowering children to learn and grow or anything is going to happen.
The most important thing to me about quality for babies and toddlers is the quality of the interactions between adults and children. And so you want a lot of warmth and caring, but you also want people who understand what very young children are on about, what they're interested in doing, understand and are excited by their development. I know quite a few people who think it would be very boring to work with babies and toddlers because they don't do anything, they can't even talk. So you need people who are very excited about babbles and coos and little developmental milestones. And then the other thing I think of is a rich and interesting environment with lots of opportunities for babies and toddlers to do what they're able to do, what they enjoy doing. And for them to use the skills that they have without being totally reliant on adults to give them things to do or play with them or show them how to play. I like the idea of a rich environment with lots of things for children to choose and adults who are there to help and support and give cuddles and talk and be available when they're needed.
Well, spending time with the children so that you can see that the adults are actually enjoying being with the children and that they're not spending too much time either doing sort of physical housekeeping type things in the centre or too much time spent adult to adult. Yes, it's important that the adults talk to each other and share where the children are up to and what to plan next, but I've seen in quite a number of centres the tendency for adults to cluster together and not get in there and talk and extend and enjoy what the children are doing.
The extent to which the adults are engaged in interacting with the children, and certainly the kinds of interactions. Are they largely, I mean, what's the content of their interaction? Is it about what the children are learning about, thinking about, the conflicts they're trying to resolve and so on, rather than just sort of ordering them around or reminding them to be quiet or still and so on. So the content of the adult-child interaction is very important, and adults should be engaged in interacting with small groups of children and individual children and some whole group experience as well.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Research shows that it's impossible for adults to have positive and growth-promoting interactions with children and families if there are not enough adults available to interact with children. Especially for under 2-year-olds and in all-day Educare, ratios of adults to children should be no more than 3 children to every adult. For over 2-year-olds in all-day Educare, optimal ratio should be about 1 adult to every 6 children, and certainly no more than 1 to 8. For children in part-day Educare centres, ratio should preferably be 1 adult to 10 children, and certainly no more than 15.
So that one of the sort of top-down indices of quality is the child-adult ratio. I must say that's one of the things that worries me a bit about the kindergartens here, because you're very large groups, 40 children and 2 adults. It's hard to get really good quality interaction between adults and children with those numbers.
Andrew, could you start and put some flour in for me? Yeah. Perhaps if I have the spoon and I'll do the mixing.
Research has demonstrated that children's development in early childhood centres is enhanced if there are trained staff working with them. Trained staff tend to provide more social interaction, more stimulation to children's language and thinking, and they're better able to plan programs to fit the individual needs of the group of children they're working in. Many people assume that any caring person can look after young children, but Anne Stonehouse points out how important trained staff are, even for very young children.
I think quite obviously people need education and training. Going back to what I said before, they need education to not only to know what those important developmental milestones are, but to know what they mean. To know, for example, that being able to transfer an object from one hand to the other, that's a very small thing, and a lot of people would overlook it. But in terms of what it allows a baby to do with objects around her, it's a very important developmental milestone. And I'm sure until I was trained, I would have overlooked something like that. The other thing is that I don't think that working well with babies and toddlers is any less sophisticated or less challenging, less complex than working well with older children. And there are lots of practices to be learned, lots of ideas to be gained.
I think that is a widely held sort of common sense notion that anyone can take care of young children who wants to, and anyone does, in fact. But there's first of all, there's a big difference between taking care of your own children and other people's children, and especially in larger groups. If they're your own children, you have had lots of experience with each other, so you can read each other fairly well, ideally, know what each child means, and so on. But for other people's children, you need very strong observational skills in order to make the right inferences about what a child means and how a child feels, and so on. And to know how to plan for a group of children who are not your own, not the children you live with all the time. I think it takes training and practice and guided practice so that someone can help you interpret your experiences with the children.
And Meade suggests that parents should find out about staff when choosing a centre.
Go to the centre, go and get some sort of sense of the organisational culture of the centre, and then start asking some questions, and ask some questions about staffing, how many staff there are for the children, why have they got those sort of staffing patterns, what are the qualifications of the staff, what are the experiences of the staff, and take a look at the charter. That will give you a sense of what are the really important goals that previous parents, staff, management committee have worked out, and that will give parents a sense of what they want for children, the people that are already in that centre.
The wheel run that goes around the tyre.
Centres where there is a relatively stable and consistent group of adults working with the children provide a better quality of educare. Children cannot develop close relationships with the adults who are working with them if these adults are constantly changing. There is a limit to the number of ties that children, especially infants, can form. The departure of known staff can confuse and distress children, and they must begin again the slow process of investing in a new emotional relationship. Staff stability is usually strongly related to the type of pay and working conditions offered in early childhood centres.
You want to ask about the stability of the staff. If it's a staff that turns over, I don't know if you use that term, but where they're constantly changing, it's an index that there might be staff morale problems, and children are very sensitive to adult moods and should not be in environments of hostility and conflict all day, which might happen, does happen. You know, it's a highly emotionally charged experience caring for young children.
Research has shown that group size has a surprisingly strong influence on the quality of early childhood educare. Being in a small group provides a warmer and more human atmosphere for small children because they have a limited capacity to form a large number of relationships. More intense conversations and interactions between adult and child and between children happen in smaller groups, and children are less likely to be distressed. People don't have to be regimented, and they can function as individuals. Groups of 10 or less are preferable for infants and toddlers. For 3-year-olds and over, groups of no more than 15 are preferable, and certainly no more than 25. It's possible to have a large centre which is subdivided into smaller groups, but these should be relatively distinct. There is no one right curriculum for early childhood educare, but it's important that centres do have a programme, an idea of what their objectives are, and a philosophy underlying those objectives. In New Zealand, having a look at the centre charter will give you an idea of the approach taken by the centre, but it's important to observe the programme in action. Centres should not merely provide custodial child-minding facilities without thought for how children learn and grow. Children do not need formal, highly structured programs in order to learn. Attention needs to be given to children's social and emotional development, as well as to their academic development. Indeed, research suggests that it is through conversations over shared activities that children's development is extended.
I think at its broadest level that it's really important for a group of people who are working together with babies and toddlers to think about the values that they're trying to support, the characteristics that they're trying to nurture. For example, are they offering the sort of program that encourages babies and toddlers to become cooperative or to become competitive? It's not as simple as that, but people need to think about that and to work out their differences, so that in that big sense of what is it we're aiming to do with children, or what sort of adults would we want to help these children to become, I think that's important. But to do a good job with babies and toddlers, you need to have an idea of what you're going to do and then be prepared to drop it. I mean, that's what I always say to students, is that yes, it's important to have that plan, but to know that sometimes some very good days may happen when you haven't done anything that was in that plan, but it's a starting point, a basis to work from.
I'm talking about adults as curriculum, as responsive playthings. I'm talking about the environment as curriculum, and that the environment is an interesting place for an infant to learn and explore. I think we're more familiar in early childhood with the concept of play as curriculum, but what is the role of the adult in that play? I think it's those kinds of things. And the other area, if I'm talking about infants, is one which is probably not addressed quite so frequently, is with other children as curriculum. And so it's really the relationships in which the infant is, and the environment, the people, the places, the things, that is the curriculum.
A lot of people get confused between academic activities, which are formal instruction in, let's say, basic skills like reading and so on, whereas that's not really appropriate for children 5 and under, and overlook the interesting ways in which we could strengthen and encourage children's natural intellectual activity through helping them undertake investigations of various things in their environment, and observing and representing what they're learning about. It requires some context in which social interaction is functional, cooperating about something. You can't just interact, you have to interact about something. Planning a project or an investigation, or how to display something you've learned, or how to build something. You do want to help children to explore something in their immediate environment that is worth learning more about, that they can sort of, if you like, unpack and find out what's behind it. And there are lots of examples of the kinds of things that children explore. They might, certainly a lot in the natural environment. Children in modern countries like ours, especially in urban areas, really don't know where things come from. They're surrounded by magic, remote control. They don't know how bread got made or even where the milk comes from anymore, unless they're still growing in very rural areas. But even in rural areas, these things are highly mechanized. So that the school then has, the early school experience has a responsibility to help children to get a deeper grasp of their immediate environment, which they cannot get incidentally, which they could have got incidentally, I think, 50 years ago.
Remember, we don't use these sort of things at home, do we, unless we have mums and dads about. So we have to put the messages onto there, Josh.
One very positive aspect of young children in early childhood centres is the opportunity to learn from and develop relationships with peers. Even very young children can benefit from such friendships with peers, either the same age, older, or younger. There are benefits from being with same age and different aged children. Getting to know your peers is a process which usually needs careful guidance from adults, especially for under 3-year-olds. If young children's relationships with each other are not carefully guided by adults, aggressive or disruptive behaviour can develop. Positive relationships develop best when the group of children is relatively stable. It's near impossible to provide quality educare and casual care situations where a different group of children who don't know each other well are grouped together. Children gain emotional support from familiar peers, and it's stressful for them to be placed in a constantly changing group. Children can also help each other to develop their own thinking.
There's a fairly large body of research now that supports what practitioners have known for a long time, and that is that very young children, even babies under a year old, form friendships. They enjoy each other. They may not have as many skills as older children in relating to each other, but other children are an important part of their lives. I don't support the idea that parents need to actively seek out large numbers of large groups for their babies to go to. I don't think babies need lots of other people, but they can certainly benefit from having some other people, including other people their own age, to be around. And certainly the opportunity for very young children to be with slightly older children is a real plus for both the older children and the younger children.
For many children, the centre or the kindergarten will be the first place where learning to build satisfying relationships with children outside the family occur. And the evidence is very convincing that the kinds of skills that are required for satisfying relationships with peers are learned very early, and if they are not, there are long-term consequences. So early childhood educators have traditionally been interested in social development. I think now the evidence backs this up as a high priority because the consequences are enormous, forever, as it were, because once you've established a sort of social reputation among peers, even if you're only 4, there is a tendency for that reputation to stay and to be reinforced by subsequent experiences.
Quality early childhood centres welcome families from all cultural groups, make an effort to meet their needs, and keep open channels of communication. There needs to be visible evidence in the physical environment and in interactions with children that staff value and respect the culture of the children. Parents are most comfortable in a more relaxed atmosphere, where the adults don't behave like experts and talk down to them. Parents should have access to centres at all times and should be able to know and, if possible, share in decision-making at the centre. If the parents are able to be involved in the daily programme, this is an especial bonus. For small children, their parents or whānau are usually the most important people in the world, so it's important that they have good relationships with the caregivers who work with them during the day. Parents also know their child best, so teachers can learn lots about the child from them.
Because of the introduction, the way that a new family is introduced into the kohanga, with the whānau there, greeting and caring for the children, taking in the children, and you become part of the whānau. As soon as that happens, the whānau concepts take place, and that you know that your child is part of that whānau child, and that whānau, and that certain things will happen. The spiritual part is very important, and I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about the feeling, the mana of the child, the mauri, the specialness of the child, where the child is accepted for what he or she is, and the nurturing of that by their self-esteem, I suppose that's the closest I can get to it, is cared for and nurtured.
Obviously, the younger the children are, the more parent-staff interaction there needs to be, and there usually is. Because it's very difficult for, let's say, a kindergarten teacher to interpret a child without input from the parent. The parent is the one who's likely to say, well, so this child, my child, means this when he says that. And that's part of being a young child. And, so that you want close cooperation with parents, and to have their confidence, and to have their information that only they have.
And Gaynor, everything pretty much as per. Yeah, right.
If you're working with a group, quite obviously you're working with other people's children, people who have different values, who have different family compositions, who have different cultural backgrounds, different language backgrounds, and so you have a responsibility to not ignore those differences, to not deny those differences, to not belittle those differences. And you also have that important responsibility to form a relationship with those parents.
In New Zealand, it's particularly important for us to offer programs which are bicultural for all children. Programs which respect and support te kanga and te reo of the Māori, as well as the values of European culture. This is an acknowledgement of the Māori people as tangata whenua of New Zealand, and the partnership implied in honouring the Treaty of Waitangi. Most centres have little difficulty in incorporating European culture in their programs, but a real test of a quality centre is whether they incorporate aspects of Māori culture and language in their programs.
Māori children are already bicultural, and that's the issue. The tauiwi or Pākehā children, we would like to be bicultural. And bicultural isn't a word that should be that is threatening. It shouldn't be seen as threatening. It's something where you can share knowledge together, and it's a better understanding of other people.
For Māori and Pacific Island families, it's not just a question of having their culture valued and respected, but a question of preservation of language and culture with the help of their child's early childhood centre.
The language is the most exciting thing, because in the language I held those concepts. And for me, and I'm doing a study on my own child, I've seen her as being active and driving our learning. Our two young children have changed our whole household. We speak Māori most of the time now, and all of us, my two older children, my husband, who's a Māori language teacher, and myself. I've learnt all my Māori from my children, my two preschoolers. And their capacity to hold the language has never ceased to amaze me. The capacity to learn songs and to be able to use phrases from their songs for their own language development.
Good quality early childhood centres need also to have a safe, comfortable and interesting physical environment. This doesn't have to be in an expensive building. A good early childhood centre has many of the physical features of a home. There should be a degree of order without sterility, with the type of space which allows people to interact together over common activities.
I think the first thing anybody would start with is that it needs to be a reasonably safe and healthy environment. And I say reasonably because I think sometimes there's a bit of a tension between making it an interesting and rich and exciting environment and making it a totally safe environment. So you've got to let children get dirty and messy and let them take risks.
Privacy is also important for children.
There are places in the environment where children can withdraw so they don't have to interact all day. Sometimes it's hard for young children to be involved and responsive to others all day long. They should be able to pull away in quiet corners where they could read or whatever. And I'm sure there's a long list of others, but those are very easy to sort of look at as you go.
For most parents, a critical feature of choosing a good centre is going to be cost. While some early childhood centres for over 3-year-olds are virtually free, and other centres are operated by parents cooperatively through voluntary labour, at most centres which offer longer hours or provide for under 3-year-olds, considerable cost to parents will be involved. The most important aspect of quality is the human element, mainly competent, trained and skilled staff. Meade suggests that in looking at the cost of early childhood educare, it's essential to see what contributes to the cost of care.
Take a look at how the money seems to be spent. Maybe ask some questions about whether the money is being spent on the things to do with really good interactions between children and the adults there. If you're just looking for visible signs, the fact that a centre is in a nice new building with lots of glossy equipment can be a bit misleading, so you need to watch out for things that are rather less obvious ways of spending money, but just find out about whether money is spent on further staff training, whether money is spent to make sure the ratio of adults to children is good, whether money is spent on making staff feel valued so that they want to stay and that they're going to stay with your child if it were to be enrolled there from 2 right through to 5. Your child wants to have a relationship with those people right through, doesn't want to have a constant turnover of staff.
And I think even now what we say is a reasonable wage for an early childhood worker is viewed as a pittance by the rest of the community. And we're still very, down the very low end. But if you start looking at that fabric in terms of staff well-being, and some of the things that I see in terms of it's the centres that have the stable staff that pay reasonable conditions, that seems to have the fundamental foundation for other elements of quality which we see in terms of the learning and development of children to be based upon. And unless you've got those quality staff, because if you look at curriculum for early childhood, adults are, in a sense, what I would see as the main curriculum. They are the most, for infants, they're the most responsive plaything. And so much of the curriculum depends on that adult-child relationship. And so unless the staff, whether they're voluntary, whether they're paid, unless their well-being is cared for, you know, that nothing else seems to operate.
We have suggested some things for parents to look for when choosing an early childhood centre for their child. Parents also have their own ideas about what's important, which will help them make a choice. The first and most important thing for any parent to do when choosing a centre is to visit, talk to the staff, and spend some time watching what goes on. Talking to other parents is also helpful. There are some public documents which parents can ask to see. One is the centre's charter, which is a statement of their particular goals and objectives. The other is the report of the Educational Review Office, which comes from an annual visit. ERO reports on how well the centre is meeting the commitments it has made under its charter. Most families at some time or other need to seek support in their role of bringing up their children. However, the value of quality educare is not just a private good for individual children and families. Societies need to develop quality early childhood educare and value the people who provide it, because it's an investment in a healthy adult population, a public good. We believe that it's a shared responsibility for parents and governments to work towards the best quality educare for our children, for governments to provide substantial subsidies so that children from the lowest to the highest income levels can benefit, and for governments to monitor the quality of centres so that low quality care is not permitted. Parents and early childhood teachers need to work together to support quality and stop any further moves to reduce it. We have fought for quality early childhood educare for many years in New Zealand. Let us do all in our power to retain it.